Hello, welcome to this AVLAND video review of the Onkyo TX-NR616 home cinema receiver. We're going to talk you through the features of this AV receiver, how to set it up, its on-screen menus, and ultimately what we think of it as an AV receiver. The NR616 from Onkyo replaces the very successful line of receivers. The last one was the 609, the TX-NR609, which won many awards. And it's a sort of mid-price receiver. It has THX Select 2 on, it has 8 HDMI inputs, True HD, DTS HD decoding, as well as Audio 2 EQ, room correction, dynamic EQ and dynamic volume. Here's what you can see when you turn the lights out, and you can see this is around the volume control you have a bat, it's like a white light. You can turn that off or dim it if you wish, as well as the front display can be dimmed. You can see here on the front panel there's a pure audio mode, and it turns that off automatically then to try and get the most purest signal path, for listening to music as best as it can possibly do, trying to turn off all the unnecessary things you don't need that might generate noise or interference. Also on the front inputs here, you can see there are direct buttons for each input. Some manufacturers like to put it into a dial, but Onkyo prefer the direct, more practical route of being able to just press the buttons and choose what you want. Also, you see the buttons here, you can use the tone controls if you wish. You can alter the bass and treble directly on the front. Now here's the MHL connection, which also doubles up as HDMI, and this is for mobile devices and allows 1080p multi-channel audio from a portable device. So it's just a very small connection, kind of like HDMI, and you can see that it does work alongside HDMI. On the front panel you've also got a front USB input, so you can connect a memory stick, an iPod, an iPhone or an iPad. You've got the setup microphone there for the Odyssey, and also a front video input. So yeah, you can see here you've got all the different things that are on here, including the QDO 4K video scaling, so it will scale up to 4K, as well as 1080p and 720p, or do those at a high resolution, but also the new 4K signal. Moving on to the back panel here, you can see it's got a lot of inputs at this price range. More and more manufacturers are cutting back on analog inputs, but it's still got 2 optical, 2 coaxial inputs, another USB, which is the first at this price point for Onkyo. So they do an optional Wi-Fi dongle and a Bluetooth dongle. You can have that around the back, or if you've got a hard drive or a flash drive with lots of your music on, you can have that permanently collected around the back, so it doesn't look so unsightly, around the front. And you keep that front USB input for occasional use. If you've just got something you've put on a flash pen, or you want to put your iPod into the front, you keep the front one reserved for that, and just use that one around the back for more long-term things like the Wi-Fi connection. And it frees up, so you can use the 2. Here you can see the 7 HDMI inputs that are around the back, as well as the 8th one on the front. But importantly at this price point, it also has twin HDMI outputs, so you can have a projector and a plasma or LCD screen hooked up at the same time. The main output only has the audio return channel on to get the audio back from your television, and it's also the only one that has the GUI, graphical user interface. Here you can see all the speaker connections. You've got, it's choosable in the menu, surround, back, front, high. You've got line outs, pre-outs for zone 2, or you can have a powered zone 2 option. The other thing you can also do with the 616 is you can have you can bi-amp your front channels, front speakers. So if you're not using this for 7.1, you're just using it as 5.1, you don't want to use it in zone 2, or you've got a power amp to put on the zone 2, you can use the 7th amp to bi-amp bi-wireable speakers, improving the sound quality of music. These terminals also all take a banana plug, as we've shown you here. You just need something like a screw to pull out the bungs that are in there. Now, moving on to the on-screen menus. Here you can see where you can set the various different resolutions out in the first menu. Whether you want both the sub or the main outputs on, and what resolution, whether you want it to just pass through the resolution of what's coming in from the, say, a Blu-ray player or a satellite box, or whether you want it to scale to a certain resolution. So if you want everything upscaled to 4K, you want everything 1080p, you can do that if you want, or you can just pass it through. I'd always recommend just passing it through. Most modern televisions are quite good at scaling, so you may not need to use a scaler, but try it and find out. It's probably the best bet. See how good, compare the scaler that's built into your flat panel television with the one that's built into the amp, because the one in the amp is pretty good. Here's where you assign the different inputs. So you can assign the different inputs, the different HDMI inputs on the back to a different thing. So this is useful if you've just plugged them all in and you don't know which one's which, you can just swap them around. And you can do the same with the component input here. You can assign it to a certain input. So you might have, say, a Wii that only has a component output, Nintendo Wii. You can assign it, you can rename the inputs as well. You can say that it's the Nintendo Wii or it's a Xbox. You can do all those and assign it to that input. Here's the same thing with the audio. So if you want the sound to come from optical or coaxial into, say, the satellite or whatever, you can assign that because you've only got 4 digital inputs, but you've obviously got more inputs in total on there. Here's where you can set the impedance of your speakers, whether it's 4 or 6 ohms. Here's where you set it up if you want to biamp. So if you want to use those other set of connections I was talking about to biamp your front channels. And also if you want to set up a powered zone 2 for say some speakers in the kitchen or outside on the patio or something like that, you can use that 7th channel of amplification. If you're only 5.1, which is what most people do in your main room, you can do that too. Here's where we set the crossover frequencies for each speaker. So you can say whether they're full frequency speakers like a floor stander, or if it's a satellite, a subsat system, you set it here. So most people would tend to go around what they show there as the THX rating, 80 Hz for most subsat speakers. But if you've got bigger full-size speakers or conventional bookshelf speakers, you're best to put it on full band. You can also set the frequency crossover of the subwoofer here as well. And this is where you tell it whether you're using different speakers. If you're not using a subwoofer, it will put the bass information through the front speakers. If you're not using a centre speaker, maybe you've just started out and you've only got some front speakers and rear speakers, it will put the centre channel information through the front speakers, in what a lot of amps used to call a phantom mode. So that's quite a useful feature of it if you're just starting out, or in some cases people don't have room for a centre speaker around the television, so you can just have fronts, rears, subwoofer. Here's where you go and you can set the different levels up. So if you've maybe got a speaker that's a bit further away, or you've got some more soft furnishings on one side of the room to the other side and you're manually setting it up, you can go in there, you can tweak the levels. You can also, if you want, equalise the different channels. I wouldn't personally recommend doing this. Really, you want to get the right speakers to go with the amplifier that should sound good without any equalisation. The same as you would in a hi-fi system, you wouldn't want an equaliser in there. But some people would want to, and it has that facility to do that. Obviously, if you go with the pure direct mode, it will turn that off. Here's a few extra settings here for related to THX audio, so you can tell it what type of subwoofer you've got and that sort of thing in there. Here's, in this menu, different audio adjustments you can have for different surround modes. So you can choose whether you're using left and right, the centre, how it reacts when you switch those different modes on, those different surround modes on the amplifier. Quite configurable. A lot of amps don't have this, so it's quite useful to tweak. It's maybe not the first thing you do when you first get it out of the box, but it's good to know that it's there and you can set it up. And you've got extra things you can tweak related to. So you can see here ProLogic 2X. It's different for different surround modes. They've got different parameters, but it's all in there. It's all adjustable. You can also set up here what the subwoofer volume is going to be for each different type of decoding. So there's Dolby Digital, DTS. I know often I find that there are different levels on different recordings. Now onto the source setup here. You can set up per source what volume you want here. So you have Blu-ray at a slightly lower level maybe than satellite, or you've got discrepancies between inputs. Here's where you set up the lip sync. So if you've got delays in the processing in your video device between the sound and the picture, once it's gone through the AV receiver, sometimes the video can be slightly delayed because of this. You can also delay the audio to match, and it'll let you do up to 800 milliseconds, depending on what the actual format is that you're feeding it. It will be different on different, it doesn't allow as much delay on some different formats. That's where you rename the input, so if you want to call it Xbox or Sky or something like that, to suit the input. Here are some of the different picture adjustments you can make with the TX-NR616. I personally recommend just leaving this completely as it is. I wouldn't have the receiver doing this, but it's there if you want it. I would set it to that setting through. Leave all your picture adjustment to your display device. Here's where you can select what audio you want from HDMI, whether to fix it so that it will only take DTS, PCM. Again, best to leave that off because that could lead to some problems where you've got different sources feeding it to different signals. Here's where you can select which listening mode you want per input. So if you want it to default to Pro Logic or you want it to default to stereo, you can set the different modes up per input. So quite useful if you know you always want on your satellite box, you always want it to be in Pro Logic 2 because that's what it's always feeding it. And similarly, if you've got a CD input, you're going to, more than usual, you'll want that actually to be just stereo. So it will remember per input. Here's where you just set up a few different settings. You can set it relative so it counts up in minus dB. This is how we have it set, so 0 is full power then. Or you can have it in its own, what it defaults to, just random volume sort of thing. You can also set the maximum volume, which again, most of the time is going to be 0 dB. The only time you'd ever want to go beyond 0 dB is if it's a very quiet source, so maybe a record or a radio that's very, very quiet. But most of the time, 0 dB is full volume. A lot of people don't realise that and you can cause damage to the amplifier and your speakers if you go beyond that. You can set up here the on-screen display. You can switch it off if you want, and what language. And there's even now a screensaver as well to stop any screen burn on your display device. Here's where you can set for different countries, the AM frequency step. Here in the HDMI settings as well, you can set up whether to use HDMI control. Can cause some problems with some devices, so if you're not using it, turn it off. Whether to have the audio pass through. Also, if your set's capable of returning the audio back to the receiver, your television, you can set that up there as well. Whether you have the lip sync on, and the Insister preview, video preview that you can have on this receiver as well, whereabouts you want that on the screen. It also has the facility, if there's no source detected, to turn itself off. Here's where you manually go and set the network settings. And you can do it by DHCP, as you can see we've done there. But if you're having problems, it's always best to try and fix the IP address to a fixed IP address on your network, if you're having any networking problems. Here's where you go to, you can make it as it is out of the box in the initial setup. We tend to just bypass that and just go into the menus and set it up ourselves, but it can be useful for sort of holding your hand if you're not used to setting these things up as you go along the way. You can have more than one of these in the room and you can set the remotes up and the receivers to respond to different remote IDs, and that's what you do there in that bit of the setup menu. Here's a really clever part of the Onkyo, in the Onkyo's range, where you can go into the menu and you can say, I've got, a different brand of Blu-ray player. So you might not have an Onkyo one. You might, for instance, have a Pioneer one. So you can type in Pioneer. You can then find the model or a model close to the model you've got, and it'll actually transmit the codes back to the remote control and set the remote control up to control your television or Blu-ray or whatever device. Now, it hasn't got all functions and it hasn't got all different devices on the market, but it's a lot easier than with a lot of AV amps. You have to actually go into like a code book to do that. Here, it's all in the menu, all in the menus, and it's very simple. Okay, now we're going to take the lid off the Onkyo TX-NR616 and show you what components it's got inside. Now, inside you see there's an absolutely huge fan on top, but the reason for it being so big isn't because it necessarily gets really hot. It's because if you have a bigger fan at a lower RPM, it's quieter. So, and it only should kick in when it starts to get hot, so you should never really hear the fan. It's fairly quiet. And certainly when it would be starting to make some noise would be when it's quite loud, so you shouldn't hear it. This is the main video board and kind of the brains of the TX-NR616. This has also the decoding chips and the all the things, real main functions of the receiver mainly concentrate on this board close to the HDMI circuits, the video processing, the upscaling, all takes place on this board. Just below there you can see the main heatsink and all the amplifiers as well. That's where they all live. Directly underneath that fan is where all 7 amplifiers are. You can actually see the transistors there with the copper screws on, which is good as well at this price point, that you get things like copper screws that are more conductive. It is good at this price point. Now I'm going to show you how to set up the networking on the Onkyo TX-NR616. And in the networking here, you can move around the things that you're going to use more. So if you're just going to use DLNA and VTuner, which is probably all I would use myself, you can put those side by side, making them quicker to navigate. Now as we go into the DLNA, we're actually using a NAS, network attached storage box. And we've actually installed a program called Mini DLNA, and this enables, not all DLNA servers work very well with FLAC. They don't often pick up the tag information on FLAC files, but this Mini DLNA software does. So all our music here, what you can see, is either stored as straight WAV files or FLAC, and some of it is also HD audio. So I'm going to show you here. This album here is FLAC encoded, and it also will, with the DLNA server we're using, but not all, brings the album art. It takes a few seconds to pull it from the server, and this is a FLAC file that's recorded at a very high bit rate, and it's 192 kilohertz, 24 bits. Which, if you press the display, which you can just see what the front screen of the actual Onkyo got at the bottom there. Keep toggling through the display, it'll show you what the actual file is. So very high bit rate, 4992, 24-bit, 192 kilohertz. So very high quality audio that this is capable of playing back directly from the file. So it'll do that from a DLNA server, or it can do it from a USB flash stick or a hard drive directly connected to it. Now, I'm going to show you what the Android app looks like that controls it. This is very similar to the Apple app as well. There's not much difference between the two. From here, you can control the receiver. You can do some of the basic settings on it, bass, treble, listening mode. We're using it on a tablet, and it's I feel they could put more buttons on there when you're using it with a tablet, but on a smaller, like a phone, I suppose, this is probably all you do want. You click the buttons on the right there to go into the actual settings, and you can control things through the CEC, for example, there through the HDMI. You can control your Blu-ray player as well, so quite neat if you want to use this in another room. So you can use the main remote in the main room, and if you've got Zone 2, you could use this to control all the things connected to it potentially. Here as well, you can also use all the networking features. So I'm going to show you the VTuner, and you can browse different radio stations. And again, in another room, you could be using this. So quite a neat feature. Someone could be in the main zone, could be watching a film, or listening to a CD, or something like that. Second zone, someone could be listening to internet radio. So it is a neat little feature, and controlling it all from either an iPod Touch or iPhone or an Android device. And you can also browse the DLNA. A good feature this has got as well, which we've only just discovered, is you can browse folders on it. You don't have to just use what the DLNA server is serving up, which means you can browse things that don't have any tag information attached to the files. So we have got some WAV files here that have no tag information, yet you can browse them just like they did, as if they did, which is pretty good. On the iPhone app, it also does this as well. You can browse the different things. Now, I think this is a FLAC file that we're playing here. If it was a WAV file, it wouldn't show the album art unless it was on the iPhone. It does do that with the iPhone app. Now, the other neat thing the Android app's got is that down the bottom you see the Android robot. It actually acts as a DLNA server itself. So any music stored on your Android device, you can serve directly to the Onkyo. You don't need a DLNA server. You don't need it on your computer. It can be just on the actual Android device. Now, these are the accessories that are inside the box. So you can see the remote control, which comes with some batteries. you have a quick setup guide now, and the rest of the detailed instructions you can either download from Onkyo's website or they come on a CD-ROM. Probably best to look at their website though, because they're always adding and changing features around on these things. There's the Odyssey setup microphone, and also here you can see you've got little labels you can put on the speaker connection, so that if you have to take it apart or move it, you can see which ones connect where again, which is a neat thing. I don't think any of the manufacturers do that, so it's quite nice to put that in there. And you've got your AM and FM aerials as well. Now, pros and cons. The NR616, it's got a lot of features for the price, very good sound quality as well for music and films, and the remote control functionality and networking features are second to none. On the downside, it doesn't have AirPlay, which is now becoming a standard feature. But if you're not using an Apple device, you can use an AirPlay-like, you can use DLNA, which you still can use from an Apple device if you've got a DLNA server. And if you've got an Android device, you can use it just like AirPlay, because you can, as I showed that little robot there that's down the left, the little Android robot, you can click on that and serve things directly to it. Other thing, like I said before, that the app is a bit basic, especially if you're using a tablet. It could do more. I would like to see a bit more functionality on one page if it's on a tablet. But apart from that, it's fairly faultless. It is an outstanding receiver. Okay, so that wraps up our review of the Onkyo TX-NR616. If you'd like to see more reviews like this, please visit our website www.avland.co.uk. Thank you.